So in this video, we are going to build a tag form from scratch using SolidJS and Tailwind CSS. This form will allow you to add tags asynchronously with a loading screen to give the user some visual feedback. It will also synchronize with other forms, enabling the user to have a list of already saved tags to choose from. By deleting a tag, it will ensure that the option is no longer available in other forms. And as a bonus, you can add tags and select them from the options using the keyboard. So to add a tag to the list, simply press Enter. To navigate between available options, use the up and down arrow keys and then press Enter to add the tag. I hope you guys like it, so let's get started. Okay, so the first thing we need is to install SolidJS, so let's go ahead and type npx git solid.js and templates, and we want the TypeScript templates, and let's save it onto our local folder. Okay, perfect. Now we need to install the Tailwind packages, so let's go ahead and yarn add onto the development side, the Tailwind CSS, post, CSS, and auto prefixer. Okay, so once that's done, let's go ahead and initialize Tailwind by typing in npx tailwind css init -p. Now on the tailwind.config.js file, we need to reference all of our files, so go ahead and replace the content with all of our JS, JSX, TS, and TSX files. Lastly, let's go ahead onto the source folder, and inside our global index CSS, we are going to import all of the Tailwind directives. Finally, on the app.tsx, let's go ahead and delete everything, and just for now, a simple header with the Tailwind style so we can check it out that everything went well. Let's go ahead and also delete the imports and delete the module.css file. Now to run everything, simply type yarn start, and it should boot up a little local server for us to test our application. There we go. Finally, what we need to install is Tailwind merge, so go ahead and yarn add Tailwind merge. This package will basically allow us to do some conditional classes with Tailwind without the fear of overwriting some previous classes. Okay, so let's start building our component, and for that we are going to create a new folder, and let's call it tags form. Inside it will have a index.tsx file, and this will be the main file for our component. So from here we can actually create the component already, so let's call it tags form, like so. And for now, let's simply return a div with the tags form text inside. We can already start with the interface, so interface tags form props. And what we'll be needing for this component is, first of all, the label. So we want to be able to render a label for each of the forms. We next need to know if the data is loading, so if it is being sent to the server or not. We need some initial data, and this will be basically a object, and it will have two main attributes. So the first one is the options, which will be an array of strings, and this will be all of the available options that the user can select on the form itself. And finally, the tags itself. So not all of the tags that are available, but the actual tags that are selected on the current form. So finally, what we need is a onSubmit function that will basically return a values, which will be a object with the tags the user wants to submit. So return void, and there you go. Don't forget to create the actual props, like so. And we can already change the app.tsx to import all of these components. So let's go ahead and delete this. And first, let's create a wrapper for our application. So a div with another div inside. The first one will be the size of our screen. So with screen and height screen also. Then it's going to have a grayish background, a flex, and center everything on the X and Y axis. Next, we are going to create the wrapper for the components itself, and it's going to be a flex with a flex call, so it's on the column orientation. It's going to have a full width with some gap between the components, And we want to say that the maximum height it's going to be 2 extra large, like so. So what we can do now already is to create and handle all of our signals. So we are going to create, first of all, 3 different forms, and we want to store all of the tags of each different form in a signal and let the app.tsx handle the logic of all of the other forms. So the first signal is to know if the application is currently sending some information to the server or not, and we're going to do a isLoading signal for that. And finally, we are going to create 3 signals, each for the tags for each of the 3 different forms. Again, don't forget, this will be simply an array of strings. Now, to handle the submission of the tags itself, we are not going to use a backend for this video, but we are going to kind of simulate so we can get the effect on the form itself, the loading. And to do so, we are going to create a new function. Let's call it handle on submit item 1. And this will be all of the tags that are going to be submitted from the first form. And what we simply want to do is, first of all, set the loading to true. So it is sending the data to the server. And then to simulate, let's give it a little bit of a timeout. In this case, I'm going to do 1.5 seconds. And then after that time, we simply want to set the tags on the first signal with the tags that we are receiving from the form, and finally setting the loading to false. So to simulate that the call to the backend has ended. Let's do the same for the other 2 forms. So handle on submit item 2 and handle on submit item 3. Okay, perfect. So let's start by importing our components. So tags form, there you go. And this will have a label. So the first one, we can say that it's the item1 text. Then the isLoading is equal to our isLoading value, like so. Now our initial data, it's going to be a object with the options, and we'll get to the options in a second, but for now let's give it an empty array. And the tags itself is the value stored on the item1 tags signal, like so. Finally, the onSubmit, it's going to be equal to our handle onSubmit item1 function. Okay, perfect. Now let's go ahead and copy this and just paste 2 more. Change this to item2 tags, also here, and this one to item3 tags, like so. Sorry, don't forget the functions also. There you go. Okay, perfect. So now back into our index.tsx file. Let's start building our component. So the first thing we need is the div we have itself. So it's going to be the wrapper for the whole component. And then we are going to add another div, which will be basically the header on top of our component. So you'll see what I mean. Inside, it's going to have a text, which will be the label we get from the props. And it's going to have a button saying edit, like so. Okay, so we might as well as start styling this. So the header wrapper, first of all, it's going to be of type flex. So we want everything in a row, and we are going to center the items. Lastly, we want the label to be separated from the actual edit button. So let's go ahead and type justify between. Okay, perfect. This might be a little bit wider than I initially thought. So let's go ahead and on the app.tsx, let's put the maximum width to XL, maybe still too much. Let's go ahead with the large. Okay, large it is. Yeah, sounds good. Now for our label, it's going to be, first of all, the text is going to be white and the font is going to be semi-bold. It's going to be of size MD. And for the button, we are going to change this, and we want to say we want to show, first of all, that's imported from SolidJS, and we want to show the text saying cancel. When do we want this? When the user is editing. So we are going to create a signal for this, but otherwise, if it is not editing, then the fallback is going to be a text saying edit. Let's go ahead and create our signal, which will be simply a Boolean signal. Starting at false, and then the user presses the button, it will change to true. Okay, perfect. So now we can start installing the button, but because we are going to use this in another place on the application, what we are going to do is actually create a new file and call it button.tsx. So let's go ahead and create a function, call it button. Let's already give it the props, and let's say button props, like so. Now we want to return a button. There you go. And the interface for the props will be like so. So first of all, it's going to have a children props, which will be of type JSX element, like so. An optional disabled, which will be of type boolean. Sorry, like so. So yes. And finally, an on-click event. So every time the user presses the button, it will get the event passed in onto our parent component. Now we want to render our children right inside our button. So let's go ahead and props.children here. The button is going to be disabled if the props disabled is also there. If we click on the button, we want to pass it into our props.onClick, like so. And finally, let's give it some styling, starting with flex and center everything. Give it a little bit of gap if we do have more than one children. And every time the user hovers, it's going to add a white background with low opacity and the padding on the x-axis of 3, the padding on the y on 1.5. It's going to be a small text with a bold font. We want to say that the text it's going to be white. And finally, we want to do a transition effect on the color. So every time the user hovers, it gets a little bit of a delay. So now back into our index.tsx file, we can go ahead and remove this and actually import our button component. So copy and paste here. And then once the user clicks the button, we want to toggle the edit to true or false depending on the use case. So let's go ahead and do a function for that. So toggle edit. And our function toggle edit will be like so. So first of all, we are going to put the set is editing to the negative value of the current value, like so. And we don't have it for now, but later we actually want to set the tags to the initial data tags, but we'll do that later. Sorry, in our button, I forgot to actually make it rounded. So let's give it a medium rounded size. And okay, now we have our button. As you can see, it has the over effect. And if we click, it changes from edit to cancel and vice versa. Okay, perfect. So now in our main wrapper, let's go ahead and already style it. So it's going to have a border. The border, it's going to be white, again, with low opacity. It's not going to have a background, rounded. We're going to add a little bit of padding, let's say 4. The width, it's going to be full. Okay, actually, instead of not having a background, let's give it a dark, like, let's say 950 grayish. Yes, like so. Now we want to actually show an icon on the edit button, not only the text itself. So what we can do is, again, go here onto our text form folder and create a new file, call it icons.tsx. We want to be able to change every icon we want in our component. So let's go ahead and create a new interface and let's just call it icon props. And what it basically has is the class string, which will be optional because we may not want to change the icon itself. But if we do, then we are going to inject into our icon. Now to get our icon, we can go to Solid Icons website and just simply type the name of the icon we want. So in this case, we want a pencil for the edit. So go ahead and choose one. And now simply copy the SVG, like so. Now on our icons file, let's go ahead and export a new function and call it pencil icon. It's going to receive the icons props, like so. And it's going to return our SVG. So just paste that. And instead of having the internal style like so, we are going to delete it and pass in the class from the props.class, like so. Okay, perfect. We are just going to need another icon, so we might as well go ahead and do that. So just copy the pencil icon down below and change this to a X circle fill icon. So back in Solid Icons, let's go ahead and do a X circle fill. Perfect. So let's go ahead and choose one. I'm going to choose this one, copy the SVG, and again, like we did with the pencil, right here, let's paste it and remove the styles and add our props class, like so. Now back in our main index.tsx file, we are going to import our pencil icon. Okay, perfect. So the size and everything seems okay. We are just going to actually give it a little bit of a margin on the right side of 2. Okay, perfect. So now below our header wrapper, we are going to need 2 things. So first of all, we are going to show something. So when the user is editing, when the user is not editing, so like so. And this will be the one responsible for showing all of the previous selected tags, or we are going to show something else when the user is editing. So when the user is editing, we can go ahead and already create a div for that. And when the user is not editing, the first thing we want to display is the tags on the current form. So go ahead and create a flex with the flex wrap. And for each of the tags that we are going to create on the signal, we are going to render a new component that we are going to also create called tag with the actual value itself. If there are no tags, then what we want to do is show a simple text saying no tags. Okay, so let's start by creating our signal. Scroll up a little bit, and right here near our is editing signal. Let's go ahead and create a new one. And this will be the signal responsible for holding all of the selected tags on the form. So on the beginning, we simply pass in the initial data of the tags. Okay, perfect. So now let's go ahead and create a new file and call it tag.tsx. Okay, and this tag component, it's going to be really simple. So again, function tag and return a div. The interface, it's first of all, we are going to export it because we'll be needing elsewhere. So tag props, and it simply receives a value which will be of type string. So go ahead and create the props object. And inside our div, we are going to add a paragraph with the props.value. To actually see what we're doing, we can go ahead and on the app.tsx file, scrolling onto the top, let's go ahead and simply give already some values so we can see. So tag 1, tag 2, and maybe tag 3 also. There you go. Now let's go again into our index.tsx file, scroll down and import our newly created component. Okay, perfect. So you see there's no tags here, and we do have the tags. Now we just need to change the styling. So let's go ahead in our tag component, start with the class, and let's give it a flex with the items center, and also center the text. Give it a background color of your choice. I'm going to go with orange. It's going to be full rounded. We don't want to have a word break anywhere, so white space, no wrap. Let's give it a gap of 2. A border, it's going to be a black border, but with a very low opacity, and a small shadow, like so. Okay, now for the paragraph itself, it's simply going to be a white color, very small, and the font will be bold. Okay, so I forgot to put the padding, so let's go ahead and do a py of 2, and the x, it's going to be 5, like so. Okay, perfect. So now when the user is editing the form, we want to show 2 things. And the first one we can start is with the save button. So let's go ahead and create a new one. We can pass in the disabled if it is loading, and every time the user clicks on the save button, we are going to handle the submit. So let's go ahead and create our function, and it's going to be really simple. So it simply calls in the onSubmit on the parent props and passes in the tags that the current signal of the form has. So every time the user changes the signal, we then want to submit the array of the new tags. Finally, every time we submit, we simply want to close the edit, so we again call in the toggle edit function. Now, besides the save button, we are going to have the actual form editable. So again, create a div, and inside this, we are going to have, again, 2 things. And the first one, it's going to be all of the previous selected tags. So we want to be able to not only show the input of the new tags we want to create, but also the ones that are currently present in the signal. So like we did before, it's going to be a for loop rendering all of our tags. Finally, for our input, it's going to be the rest of the width of our editable wrapper. And to do that, we are going to actually create another div. And inside, we are going to add the inputs tag, like so. And we want to say that this input is going to be of flex 1. So we know for sure that the input, depending on the size of the components, it's going to always stretch to the end. To start seeing our changes, we can just, for now, change the value of the is editing to true. Okay, perfect. And let's start styling our editable. So it's going to, first of all, be a flex, and it's going to be a wrap, like so. Then let's center the items, add a little bit of gap between the items, and we are going to add a border. Again, it's going to be a white border with very low opacity. It's going to be rounded, like so. And we want our border to be dashed. Let's add a little bit of padding. And we want to change the background every time the user hovers. So onto a white background. And we want to say that the cursor will be pointer because we want to make this clickable. So now if we hover on our container, we can see that it highlights all of our background. Okay, so now for our input, first we want to fit the width and give it a fixed height of 8. Give it a little bit of padding inside for the text and remove the background, so transparent. Also delete the outline, so every time the user is focused on the input, we don't have any kind of outline. And let's change the caret to orange. So if you don't know what the caret is basically if we now click on the input, we can see that the blinking line over here is called the caret, and we've just changed its color to orange. Now we want the text to be white and extra small and bold. And finally, we want the cursor to be pointer because again, this input is going to be clickable. And for now, let's just add a placeholder saying add a new tag. So, okay, I made a mistake, and actually all of this, it's not going to be inside of this wrapper because this wrapper, it's for the button itself. It's actually going to be outside. So let's go ahead and paste this here. Okay, perfect. And now we have our save button on the bottom instead of being on the right. Finally, let's just give it a little bit of space between the button and the actual edit wrapper. So space Y4 and a little bit of margin from the header on the top. Okay, so now in order to handle the adding logic, first of all, let's just go back into our app.tsx and let's just delete these predefined tags like so. And now by going back into our index.tsx file, what we want to do is scroll onto the input right here. And what we basically want to do is an event handler for the key press down. So every time the user presses a key, we want to make an action on the input. So in order to do that, simply place here on key down, and then just pass an handler on key down. So we are going to create this function. So go ahead and copy this, and right over here, let's create a new function like so. Okay, and now because we are using the on key down event, we know that the type of event we are going to receive from this function, it's going to be of type keyboard event. And what we want to say is basically if this event dot key, so the key that the user pressed on the input, is equal to enter. So again, if the user pressed enter, then we want to add a tag. And what tag is that? Well, we can get the value from our event. So go ahead and create a value constant, and it's going to be event.target value. Now, TypeScript is complaining right here, but this is not a problem. We simply have to wrap our event.target as an HTML input element. So the first thing we want to do is, if there is no value, then we simply want to return the function. Now, if there is a value, then we simply want to update our tag signal by picking up the previous tags and simply adding the value to a new array. Finally, every time we add a tag, we want to clear the value on our input. So to do that, we simply go ahead and do an event.target.value, and then we assign an empty string. So now by clicking on our input and adding a new tag, now by clicking enter, you can see that it adds a new tag into our signals tag, and it gets rendered on the screen with the input still on the right of our tags. So now, before handling the logic of submitting a tag, what I want to do first is actually do the loading wrapper. So every time there is a new onSubmit, then it sets the loading to true and we render a loading screen. So on our component, let's scroll up to the bottom, and below the show tag, we are going to create a new show. And for now, just set it to true so we can see what we're working with. And it's going to be, first of all, a div, and then inside it's going to be another div. So we can go ahead and do some classes, and this will be a black background of around 60 opacity. It's going to be absolute because we want it to be on top, in front of our component. So we're going to add a top of 0 and a left of 0. Finally, it's going to be the whole component, so go ahead and give it a full width and a full height. We want it to be on front of our component, so let's give it a little bit of a Z index and then just center everything. So items center and justify center. Okay, so now as you can see, we have the whole screen blacked out, and that's because we actually are saying that this is absolute, but it is relative to the first, relative component, and in our case, it's our application. So what we want to say is that this absolute component is relative to our component itself. Relative. Now, just to remove these square borders, we're going to give it also a rounded LG, like so, and perfect. Now for the actual loader, what we can do is, again, give it a class, and we are going to say that it has a border, white with around 7 opacity. The border itself, it's going to be of size 4, so it's going to be a thick border. Let's give it a fixed height and width of 8, like so. Again, it's going to be rounded full, so rounded full, so we can get a circle. And finally, we are going to add a border on the top with a color of your choosing. So I am going with orange. Okay, perfect. And now to animate this, simply type in animate spin. Perfect. Now, of course, we don't want this to be rendered all the time. So this is only going to show when the props is loading. So now by going into our component, let's go ahead and add a tag 1 and a tag 2. And now let's click save. Okay, so as you can see, it loaded and it exits the edit mode, and it is now saved on our app.tsx. Now, in order to see all of the tags of all of the components, what we can do is on our app.tsx is create a new signal, and it's going to be called all tags. And the only thing that it's doing is, first of all, it's spreading all of our tags into a single array. So this will be an array containing all of the tags of all of the components, but we don't want to show the repeated ones. So we are going to create a new set with that array, and this will give us all of our unique tags in all of the arrays. Finally, to see all of the tags, simply go down onto our render method and just simply do, first of all, a header saying all tags, and then a flex wrap to render all of our tags. So import the for loop and the tag from our component. So now by going here, let's do it again, add a tag 1, tag 2. So as of now, only the first form has the tags saved inside. If we now click save, it simulates that it's going to go to the backend, and we have here all the tags that are stored. So if we now go on to the second one, and let's add here a tag one. So in theory, we should not have a new tag one on the alt tags, but if we now add a tag tree, then it should appear on the top. Okay, perfect. So now we have each of the tags of each of the forms, and we have a global tag array with all of the unique tags between the forms. Let's just go ahead and back in our index.tsx, let's fix our isEditing signal because as of now it's set to true, but we want to false. And the next thing we are going to do is beginning the delete process of the tags. And in order to do that, we actually need to change our tag component. So on our tag.tsx file, let's go ahead and add a new attribute to our interface. And it's actually going to be a function. Let's call it onDelete. It's going to be optional because there are times that we don't render the onDelete method. But if we do, we simply pass in a function onDelete, like so. And then below the paragraph, we are going to show only this div when there is the props onDelete, like so. And this is simply going to be a button. So go ahead and create a button. Don't forget to import the show, like so. And inside it's going to be the previous icon we've created. So it's the X circle fill icon. And before finishing our tag, let's actually change the index so that we can see what we are doing. So going back into our for loop for each of the tags when the user is editing, what we want to do now is actually pass in a onDelete with the handler. And it's a function that we are going to create. So let's go ahead and do that already. On the top, function handle onDelete tag, and we are going to receive a tag from it. So now if we click on the edit, we can see that we already have the icon over there because we are telling the component to have an onDelete method, and this will render the delete icon. Now to finish this up on our tag, first of all, let's give it a onClick event. So every time the user clicks on the icon, we are calling the onDelete on the props. And for the classes, it's going to be a text white, but with a little bit of opacity. It's going to have a hover effect, and it will change the text to white. It's going to be completely rounded, so rounded full. Add a transition only on the colors, a fixed width and height of 8, like so. Like so. And then let's just center everything. So justify center also. Okay, now this looks a little bit weird. So in order to fix this, what we are going to do is change the button itself. So the tag itself. So let's go ahead and use the Tailwind merge function. Again, wrap all of our classes inside, like so. And this will be our main class for the tag. But now what we want to do is, if there is a props onDelete, right, then render this. Otherwise, render this class. And what we want to do is actually take in the paddings over here and put it right over here because we want to show this if there is no onDelete. If there is, then simply set the padding on the Y to 0 and the X axis to around 3.5. Okay, so let's test it. Well, it looks better, but the icon is still not in the place I want it to be. So let's go ahead and our button, let's just give it a little bit of a negative right margin, like 2, for example. Okay, perfect. Now, if we go with the mouse over, we can see that it highlights the X. And if we now click, then we should delete this from our signals array. Now, to actually delete the tag from our signals array, then it's simply to set the new tags of that signal and filtering the previous tags with the, let me just change this to, let's say T, and this will be tags. So we want to filter the previous tags with all of the tags that are not equal to the current tag. So in this way, we will get a new array saved on the signal with all of the tags except the one we want to delete. So now if we add a new tag and another one, if we now click on the X, we can see that it deletes the tag from the signal. Okay, so the last thing I want to do in this video is actually fix a few things. So for example, now if we click on the input, you see it gets focused and we can start typing, but I don't want it to be like so. I want so the user, every time it presses the edit button, it automatically focuses, so we can already start typing. And as of now, it's not doing so. So let's go ahead and fix that. And to fix that, just go ahead and scroll on to the top and simply create a new variable. Let's call it input reference, which will be of type HTML input element. And then by going on to our input, what we want to do is reference that variable like so. So what we can do now is on our toggle edit function is, so first of all, okay, I forgot about this. What we want to do is every time the user changes the edit button, we want to set it to the default values, right? Because again, if we do a cancel, we want it to be with the same type of values as we did on our initial data. So it's really simple. Simply type in set tags. So we update our signal with the tags with the initial data from our props. So initial data dot tags, like so. We can go ahead and delete this. And now, yes, we want to do is every time the user toggles the edits on to true, we want to focus on the input so it can already start typing. And to do that, it's really simple. If it is editing and there is a reference, because there might not be, then we simply want to call the focus method of that input. So go ahead and save it. If we now click on the edit button, we can see that it automatically focuses on the input and the user can already start typing. Perfect. Now, since we are dealing with the focus of the input, another thing we can do is to actually put the focus on the whole wrapper itself. So as of now, for example, the input, it's not focused. And if we want to start typing, we have to click on the input itself. So if we click, for example, let's say over here, you can see that it doesn't get focused. Or if we click a little bit on the top, it's not going to get focused because the input is this little element right here. So as you can see, so there is a little bit of a border on the top and the bottom, and there's a lot of empty space on the right. So what we want to do is whenever we click on this wrapper, that's why we have the over effect, then we want to focus the input itself. So to do that, let's go ahead onto the bottom and where we have our wrapper right here. Let's go ahead and add a new on-click event like so, and simply say that, if there is an input ref, then let's just focus on that reference. So now if we click outside the input, it gets defocused. And if we click somewhere on our wrapper, then it automatically focuses the input. Okay, so to start with our options dropdown, the first thing we are going to do is create two new signals, one for the whole options array and another one to know which selected option is active. So the same way as we did our tags, we are going to do our options and get it from the initial data. Now simply create the selected option index signal, which represents the index of the option that is currently selected. So we are just going to leave it to -1 at the beginning to represent none of the options being selected. Now for the wrapper itself, we want it to be in regards to the inputs. So below the input, let's go ahead and create a new div. And inside the div, we are going to render another for loop with each of the tags from the options and also the current index, like so. And of course, each of these options are going to be a button. So button with the name of the tag, like so. Our wrapper, it's going to have some conditional classes. So let's go ahead and initialize as an object with the Tailwind merge function. And our main class, it's going to be, first of all, an absolute. It's going to have a very dark background. It's going to be rounded, a little bit of a padding. We're going to add a overflow on the y-axis of auto, because if it is too big of a list, then we want it to be scrollable. Add a 50z index to be in front of everything. And then to do some effects, let's first of all do a transition all. And let's give it a short duration of 100 milliseconds. Now, the first thing we want to know is if the drop-on is open or not. So let's go ahead onto the top and create a new signal saying is open, and then again set is open. Okay, so now what we want to say is if the dropdown is open, then we want to add a maximum height of 60, for example. We'll get into that later. Sorry, we forgot the comma here. There we go. We want to add a padding on the Y of 2. We want to add the border, and we want that border to be white with a low opacity. And finally, we want it to be visible, right? So this is just so it opens and it stays visible every time the dropdown is open. Otherwise, what we want to do is set the max height to 0, the padding Y to 0, and the opacity to 0, like so. We want to do also some conditional classes on the button of each option. So go ahead and copy this, paste it over here, and let's just delete all of this. And our main class for the button is, first of all, it's going to have a white text. It's going to be extremely small and bold. It's going to have a little bit of the padding on the Y. So let's say at 3.5. And sorry, on the X, and on the Y, it's going to be 1.5. Finally, it's going to have a full width, like so. It's going to be rounded. We don't want the words to break, so white space, no wrap. And we want to center the text, so flex items center, and a transition on the colors. So now what we want to render conditionally is to know if the selected option index is equal to our current index. Because if it is so, then we simply want to change the background to a white with low opacity, like so. So this just means that whatever option is selected, it will just change the background so the user has a visual cue on what is currently selected. Okay, so when do we want to open this options dropdown? Well, I think it makes sense every time the input is actually focused, right? So every time the user either clicks on the input or clicks on the edit button, then we want to automatically print all of the available options the user has. So in order to do that, if we go into our input element right here, we can actually trigger a new event handler called onFocus, and we are going to create a new function for that. And this will trigger every time the input is focused. So handle on focus. So, and first of all, what we want to find out is all of the options available for this form in specific. So what I mean by this is we can't pass in the options from the initial data because this contains all of the options on all of the forms. But if the form itself already has that tag, then it doesn't make sense to render that as the option, right? Because it's already there. So what we do is simply filter all of the options on our all forms. And we say that if our tags doesn't include the option itself, then we want to render it on the option. So go ahead and simply save this value onto our option signal. And because we want to start with the clean slate, we simply set the option index to -1. Now, as of now, the dropdown is not open, and you could argue that you could already open this right now, but what if there are no options? It doesn't make sense to open the dropdown if there aren't any options, right? So instead, what we can do is say that only if we do have some options, then we want to set our open to true. Okay, so one thing I did miss is the fact that this, again, it's an absolute element, but there is no correct relative. And the correct relative is actually the input wrapper. So go ahead and click relative right over here. And now to be able to see the options itself, we have to update our app.tsx because remember, we set this onto an empty array, but what we want is to pass in all of our tags. And then inside the form itself, it's going to filter them based on the tags that the form contains. So go ahead and do that. Okay, and if we now click on the edit button, we can see that the dropdown opens with the current options available for this form. Now, before we select a new option and then create a new tag with it, we first are going to filter based on the input. So if the user now types, for example, U, then it shouldn't be appearing any tag on the options, right? Because U doesn't belong to tag 1, tag 2, or tag 3. So to do that, let's go on to our index. And on the input, we are going to add a new event handler. It's going to be on input. Let's create a function for that. And from this function, we are going to receive a event of type input event. And from here, we can extract the value that's currently being typed on the input. So this will be triggered every time the user presses a key and changes the value of the input, and we can extrapolate the value from there. So what we want to do, we want to do a basic filtering on the available options to get the new options depending on what the user is typing. So go ahead and create a new options and just assign for now equal to the option, all of the options available. Much like we did on the on focus, we are going to filter this option based on the current possible options. And then finally, just filter another time, this time only to check if all of the remaining options, by doing a lowercase, because this is not going to be case sensitive, then if they include the value, again to lowercase, then we can say for sure that this is a new option available. Now what we want to do is, if there are new options, then we want to simply set these options with the new options and set the open to true. Otherwise, if there are no options, then we don't need the dropdown, so we can set the open to false, like so. So now if we click on edit and type in, for example, U, there are no new options, so it sets the open to false. If we delete it, it appears all of the options again. And for example, if we type in 2, then we can see that we get the tag 2 because indeed tag 2 contains the letter 2. Now, another thing we want is every time the user gets the options available, we want it to close it every time we click either outside the input or just cancel the input itself. And to do that, instead of doing an on click outside of the elements, what we can do is simply say that if the input is no longer focused, then simply close the dropdown. And to do that, what we can do is create another handler, call it handle on blur, that simply sets the is open to false. And on the input, let's go ahead and on blur, pass in the handle on blur. So now if the user clicks on the edit button, it gets focused, then it opens the dropdown. But if we click outside of the input, then we see that the focus disappears. So the on blur is triggered and the dropdown is closed. So now to actually add an available option onto a new tag, let's go ahead and add a new event on the option. And it's going to be the event of on mouse down. This will pass in the tag to a function we are going to create. So function handle on click option, and then the name of the, let's call this option, which will be a string. So, and what we want to do with this? Well, first of all, we want to update our tag signal with the option inside the array. So we get all of the previous tags inside the new array and add a option. We also want to clear whatever value was on the input. So go ahead and input ref.value, put it in empty string, and we want to close the dropdown like so. So now if we click on the edit and click on, for example, tag 2, we can see that the new tag is created from the option. But unfortunately, as you can see, there's no longer a dropdown available. And this is because we set it to set the open to false. But now what we have to do is, again, do the same process of knowing if we have new available options based on the new tag that was added on the form. And if so, then we want to open again the dropdown. So inside the handle on click option, we are going to just copy all of the logic of our options, but we are going to do on a set timeout because there's this a little animation of opening and closing, and it's about 100 milliseconds. So we are just going to put the same value over here. And now if we click on one tag, we can see that it creates the new input and it opens again the dropdown, but now with the new available options, which will be all of them except the tag 2. Now you can see that we currently don't have a visual cue on which tag is being hovered. And in order to do this, what we are going to do is on the button of the option, we are going to trigger on the on mouse over event, and we are simply going to set the option index to the index of the button that had the on mouse over triggered. So if we hover now, we can see that the background gets highlighted depending on the option hovering. One thing I don't like is if we add more tags, let's just say, for example, JavaScript, HTML, CSS, Node, whatever, and just save it. We can see that now the number of options exceeds the maximum height of the dropdown, and therefore we have this scroll bar. But again, I don't like this scroll bar, so let's go ahead and just change it completely. And to do that, open up your folder and create a new file, call it styles.css. And we are going to change the WebKit scroll bar. So let's give it a name of dropdown and simply change the scroll bar to the following width and padding, the track to be transparent, and the thumb to be a white background color with a rounded border radius. So on our index.tsx, let's go ahead and import our styles, and let's inject this onto our dropdown. So over here, we can now add a new class on the Tailwind merge, and we are going to inject the dropdown from our styles. So as you can see, we now have a much cleaner and thinner scroll bar. Now, finally, to handle the logic of clicking on the buttons to select the option, what we can do is on our handle on key down event, now add a new option for the arrow down. So if we click on the arrow down, we want to increment the option selected, right? Because by clicking down, we are going up on the array, but we don't want to exceed the array itself. So that's why we do a math.min between the next index or the length of all of our options, so we don't get outside of the array. And finally, we are going to do the same, but for the arrow up. So again, we are going to decrement the index of the option, but we are going to choose the maximum value in this case between that new index and -1, because we don't want to have less than -1, because -1 already represents not any of the values selected. So now if we click on the drop down, if we now click on the arrow down, we can see that the option index is being chosen differently, and we get the highlight corresponding to that index. If we go up again, it goes to -1, and therefore none of the text gets selected. What we now want to do is every time we click on the enter, we actually select this option instead of the value that's currently inside of the input. So in order to do that, let's update our handle on key down. And instead of passing the value as the value we get from the input, first of all, we are going to check if there is a selected option. So if the selected option index is greater than 0 and it's less than the options.left, because again, we can go a little bit further, +1, meaning that none of it is selected. But if it is within that range, then instead of passing in the value we get from the input, we are actually passing in the value from our options. So now if we go here, select with the arrow keys, for example, JavaScript. Now if we click enter, we can see that it adds the new JavaScript onto the text. But as you can see, it's still on the new options, and this shouldn't be like so. And this is because we are not doing the same logic as we were doing before. So in order to fix that, every time there is a new enter pressed, we are going to, again, filter all of our options to a newly options available. So again, one more time, select JavaScript with enter, and there is no more JavaScript available on our new options. Okay, perfect. So now you have your text form up and running. And as you can see, we now have our options. We can select them either with the mouse or with the arrow keys and just press enter. Or if we prefer, we can simply just type in something, and if there is that option, the option gets filtered and we can again select either with the mouse or with the keyboard keys. If there is none present, then we can simply say something, we can type it in, press enter, and the new tag is added to the form. We can now save it, and it gets added to the global tags with a mimic of a backend saving. And all of this simulates that the tag is being stored on a backend of your choosing. Okay, perfect. So I hope this component is useful to you guys. I know that for everything that's related to content, normally we have some kind of tags mechanism, especially when we want to do some kind of suggestion on which we have to do some sort of a Euclidean distance between the tags so we know what content is related to another. And with this, we can intuitively create new tags, delete new tags depending on the content, and save everything asynchronously to our backend. Again, I hope you guys liked it, and if you like the code, then you can always download from my website. I'll leave the link in the description. Until the next one, cheers!